All right, everybody, we're ready to get started. So if I can get your attention up this way, I'll give you just a moment to look over here. I see we've got about 4 classrooms on right now. LaShare, if you could keep your mic on mute while I'm talking, that would be good, or I will do it for you. All right, so we're here on Little Cayman. I just got here 2 days ago after flying out from Seattle, and the weather is beautiful right now. I'm actually going to turn the camera so you guys can see what's going on here. Not too shabby. Which makes the research much easier for the scientists. But before we got here, I guess from what I heard, it's been quite windy. So in any case, I got here 2 days ago, and I've been walking around watching the researchers get prepared, going out for 3 daily dives, and bringing back all kinds of really cool stuff. If you haven't already, remember to go and check out the blog, which I've emailed all your teachers have the title of the link for the blog. But I'm posting there now every day, a few times a day, videos and photographs and behind the scenes stories. And remember, you guys can all comment on all of those, and I'll respond to your comments, and those will pop up on the blog. But it's a great way for you guys to stay connected in between our live video feeds, and you can see what's going on and ask questions. And if I can't answer the questions, I would be happy to ask a scientist, because I'm not a scientist, I'm an educator. I don't know the answers to a lot of the questions. So in any case, we're here now on Little Cayman. They've been out checking out the fish, and what I thought would be really cool is something that's different for me. This is the first time on the, I think, 7 years I've been working on the project that Ned and Anna Deloach have been here. Ned is one of the co-founders of Reef, and Anna is his wife, and she has become very involved in Reef since its inception. And so I'm going to introduce you to her right now. There's Anna. Hey, Martha, can you give me a thumbs up that you guys can hear me okay? Or maybe shoot a little text over just before Anna starts talking. I want to be sure you guys can hear. Okay, so Anna, welcome. Could you first tell us, or tell the kids a little bit about how you got involved in this? Because my understanding is that you weren't a marine biologist or an oceanographer before this.
No, I was a computer scientist, actually, and my husband Ned and our business partner Paul Human founded Reef. So I just ended up naturally involved in the organization. My passion is fish behavior.
Well, can you talk a little bit about fish behavior? I don't know about you guys. When I first worked on the project, I didn't know anything about fish behavior. So could you talk a little bit about what that means when you're referring to fish behavior?
Well, fish eat, they reproduce, and it's one of the things that we have a really good time watching and observing and record. And a book on reef fish behavior,
yeah,
and we're in the process of updating that book, so we'll publish it again next year. And a big part of that is life cycle and spawning. And I have traveled all over the world to spawn, and everything from basslet spawning up to bigger groupers, but we had never seen the Nassau grouper spawn. And
so is this your first time here?
This is the first time here, and we're thrilled. We're thrilled. It's unlike any of the other fish spawning we've ever observed. It's so special. And
what sets it aside from other spawning that you've seen?
The numbers of fish, because normally we would see a fish spawn, a pair spawn, that's 2 fishes spawning together, a male and female, just together, or maybe a small harem or a small group of like the wrasses who spawn with maybe 50 fish together, but never anything like we've seen here in the Nassau groupers. When last night there were thousands, and this morning they weren't spawning, but they were all gathering because they're still very excited about being there. And probably 5 or 6,000. The scientists were estimating that we saw in the group, and it's something so special. There's really nothing like that left in the Caribbean. I think this is very special to the Cayman Islands.
Yeah. A couple of things that I've seen about fish behavior that I find interesting is, and maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the more unique behaviors that you've observed over the years traveling around with Ned and Reef. Like some of the fish mouth brood, or some of the fish can actually change sex, or there's other interesting things that they do.
Yes,
Could you share one or two sort of interesting stories?
I think one of the most fascinating is the little yellowhead jawfish, which you have here. They're all throughout the Caribbean, and the male holds a little ball of eggs in his mouth for 5 to 6 days. And when you're watching them, can you see you can see the eggs, and you can tell, even if you look at the fish from behind, you can see that his head is really swollen. And even if we see a jawfish from behind and see its head really large and swollen, when we swim around and look at it head on, we can see this big ball of eggs. And what's so interesting is you can tell the age of the eggs by the colors. So when the jawfish first gets the eggs, they're yellow because they're full of yolk. And then they turn kind of greenish because now the eye pigment in each little egg of each little fish is starting to show up. And by the last day, they're totally silver. So this little jawfish is holding a big ball of eggs in his mouth, and they're so silver that if you get close enough, you can actually see the eyes in each egg. It's really fascinating. And as he has to aerate them so that the whole ball is getting enough oxygen and fresh water over them.
So it's the male that's holding.
The male is holding the eggs, and he'll spit them out and suck them back in very quickly. And that's
to give them the air, to
aerate them and to give them fresh water. And it's really fun to watch. Wow. And then at dusk, right after sunset, on maybe the 5th or 6th night, he releases the eggs. And the only way that we can tell that that's the night that fish is going to release the eggs is that the fish will, when they go to bed at night, when it's dark, the fish go down and they pull a rock over their hole. So jawfish live in a little burrow in a hole with their little heads sticking up like this, and they pick plankton all day. And when they go to bed at night, they pull a rock over the top of their hole, so they're going to sleep. But if you watch a male jawfish with a mouthful of eggs, and the night that he's going to release his eggs, he will not cover his hole. So that's how we've learned that that's the night that they're going to release.
Really?
And yeah, and then we'll go back that evening and he hasn't covered his hole up, and we know, and we'll just wait. And then all of a sudden he'll come up and just start spitting all these babies.
So jawfish are not very big fish,
no,
right?
They're maybe 2 inches long at the most.
So is it difficult to photograph something that small?
We sneak up on them. We've learned a lot about fish behavior, at least fish behavior in relative to divers.
Right.
And we know that we can sneak up on jawfish if we wait long enough. Sometimes we'll spend an entire dive getting closer, inching closer, so they're not worried about us, and they tend to forget about us if they know that we're not a threat. We're not out there trying to eat them. And they'll relax and come up and start feeding, and the male jawfish will start aerating his eggs, and we can get some good pictures then.
Wow. Now, have you ever encountered any sort of totally bizarre, like something that you had never seen before when you were out there? Have you ever seen a new fish maybe, or? We've
discovered a few, and I've personally discovered 2 new fish.
What is that like? I mean, that's got to be a real
thrill.
Yeah.
It's a thrill when you realize that fish, I've never seen that fish in a book or online or anywhere. And to select the name. Wow. And we named one after one of the founders of Reef, Paul Human. So we have Cyril Labra's human eye out there. And then the other one is a very beautiful flasher wrasse, and we named it after our dive guide who's worked with us for many, many years.
Wow.
So that's Paracalinus alfiana.
So what is your life like during the year of working on, filming videoing underwater? Is it something that you're doing all the time, or is it just part of the time? How much time do you think you spend out in the field? We spend 4 to 5 months a year out in the field, and part of our time is leading reef field surveys. So we volunteer and lead a couple of reef field surveys every year, and we take volunteer divers out and count fish.
and try to learn fish and
Mhm.
identify fish. And it's a learning process for me and Ned as well, because we don't know every fish everywhere. So it's a lot of fun to go somewhere new and try to learn the new fish. So we do that. And then we're also out working. We're always updating the fish identification books.
Yeah.
And right now, as I said earlier, we're updating the reef fish behavior.
Yeah.
So we're spending a lot of time. And that's what really led us here. The Grouper Moon project has been going on since 2002. This is our first time here, but and we meant to come out sooner to see things, but this was the right year to do it because of the updates. We want to include some information in the book for that.
Well, and I something that I found really interesting working on this project is that you guys are constantly learning new stuff, like you just said.
Absolutely.
I mean, that there's so much that we still don't know about the ocean and about what lives in the ocean. That's really exciting. So I see Miss Mizell has a question, and it says, do other fish wait for the jawfish to release its eggs by knowing that it doesn't cover its hole at night?
Okay, I have never seen other fish hanging around. Actually, I take that back. I've seen an eel, a sharp-tailed eel, try to go down into the jawfish hole, and I, sorry to say, grabbed the eel by the tail and moved it because I didn't want it going down there. And
Protector of jawfish.
Yeah, and then I've also seen some big tarpon who were actually just being nosy and attracted by my lights, and they kept coming in, and they were more annoying. And you know, the jawfish is not going to, it doesn't come all the way out of the hole to release the eggs. It comes right to the top of the hole, and it's very cautious. And if anything moves, it will go right back down. So when the tarpon come in, of course, the jawfish goes back down. So I've been known to swat a couple of tarpon too. So
and tarpon are, I mean,
they're big.
Guys, a tarpon, I mean, it's bigger than I can make it on this screen. I mean, you know, 4 feet, and they're silver and big, and they can be rather intimidating.
They're very intimidating. And what I learned the first time I swatted a tarpon is they make a boom. So
really?
Yes.
They made a
boom
boom
at me, just like the groupers do. I swatted the tarpon, and it went with this big boom, and of course that scared me, scared the tarpon, and scared the jawfish. So some interesting things that we learn when we're underwater.
I mean, it seems like almost always there's something new. So I see Miss Damon has a question for you. Is it common for fish to spawn at dusk? Do we have any ideas about why?
I think that most scientists believe that it's because they're under the cover of darkness. The eggs maybe have a little better chance of floating away and making it to a larval stage and little fish stage. I think the hungry predators, a lot of them are visual, and so that's what
maybe the light.
Think. So there's less light at dusk, and so the fish have a little better chance. The eggs have a better chance of making it.
Well, I know a lot of our students have been reading some nonfiction text about the reef, and one thing that they were asking me about before I left was, well, why would they spawn at dusk when that's the time that most fish are out hunting, right? Is it like you still have some of the daytime fish out and some of the nighttime fish out? I wasn't sure if that was true, or
I don't know, unless maybe the fish that we've been observing are daytime fish, and so that's the lowest light for them before they go to bed. I really don't know. I don't know. Don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
But the ones that we've seen parrotfishes spawn during the day. We see blueheads, little wrasses spawn during the day, and yellowheads spawn during the day. But a lot of the fish are right at sunset, and often right after sunset when it's dark.
One thing that all of the students have been learning about is that one of the challenges for conservation efforts for the NASA is that they can't reproduce until they're about 7 or 8 years of age. Is that typical for fish to have to wait that long before they can reproduce?
You know, I don't know, but I've been told by another scientist friend who studies the tiny gobies and blennies that by the time we see the little tiny blennies like the spiny head and the secretary blennies, that they actually only last a couple of months. So they land, on the reef, start reproducing, and they're gone. So he said they're not very long lived.
Wow.
So the smaller fish like that, I don't know about the older fish. I don't know.
That's interesting. So while we have Anna here for a few more minutes, if any of you guys have questions, okay. So I see Miss Tibbetts has a question. Do eggs get eaten by other fishes?
Yes, we see that a lot.
Have you seen that here?
I didn't see it, but I saw Bryce's video from night before last.
And what did you see? Because they haven't seen it.
Okay, Bryce had video of the group responding. Dr. Simmons, Bryce Simmons had the video, and as the clouds of spawn were going up, there were groups of mackerel scad and small barjacks, hundreds of them, just swirling around and feeding.
Wow.
And we've seen that with other fishes. When parrotfish is responding during the day, we've seen other fish come in, and yeah, so they do get eaten. You have to think about, it takes, the fish probably only needs to reproduce itself once or twice in its lifetime just to replace itself on the reef. But they are reproducing and producing thousands of eggs. And I think it's this cycle because those eggs are feeding other fishes.
Right.
And so it's this big cycle of replenishment.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So I see we have some friends out from Turks and Caicos. Do you guys have from LaShare's classroom? You guys have any questions? If you want to, you can unmute and ask, or you can type it into our little text chat on the right-hand side. And I see Miss Damon has a question. How many fish actually live to spawning?
Well, I guess if you figure that we've got millions of eggs being released in a spawning event, and you don't have that many fish, you don't have millions of fish on the reef, I think that it's pretty perilous life out there. My husband Ned likes to call it snapping jaw hell.
Really?
Because everything's eating all the little tiny eggs and larvae. And so I think very few of them actually make it back to the reef. And then they're small, and they might be preyed on by bigger fish. So I don't think the numbers are that big. So
the vast majority get eaten?
Or... I think the vast majority get eaten before they ever make it back to live on the reef.
Okay. One other behavior question that I want to ask.
Okay.
I've noticed on some of the dives that I've been out there, different species hanging out together. Maybe they're feeding together or something. What do you know what's going on there?
Yeah, there's something. It's called nuclear hunting.
Okay.
And they tend to hunt. Often you'll see an eel swimming along.
So different species.
Different species
hunting together, working together.
Yes, and the eel. I think that they're being I think the groupers and snappers and jacks are being opportunistic. They see the eel swimming along, and it'll go into a reef that's full of hiding holes. And we've actually seen this happen. The eel will go in, and then little fish inside the reef come flying out because there's a home invader there coming into their reef, and they come flying out and they get grabbed by a grouper or one of these other fish that are hunting with them.
So that's quite a different behavior than maybe sharks that might have a remora on them that are feeding on detritus or leftover food.
Right. So, but I think the term is called nuclear hunting. And we'll see it with octopus. There'll be an octopus out walking along the reef, and it's out hunting and putting its arms down in holes and looking for things, and little fish will jump out, and the octopus is actually being followed. We've seen one octopus followed by maybe 5 or 6 different species of fish. A yellowtail snapper, a mahogany, a coney, and a couple of other fish, and all of them are following the octopus.
Wow.
So they're being very opportunistic.
There's a lot of amazing behavior happening under the water.
There is. And there's so much more that we have yet to learn.
So of all the places that you get to visit, and I assume you get to visit quite a few, are there places that are just your absolute favorite to go and dive and photograph?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, this island is my favorite place right now. Because that grouper spawning aggregation, and my husband has been diving for almost 50 years. And he came up today on the boat and said, I think that is one of the best dives I've ever made in my life. And
this morning's dive.
This morning, it was so beautiful. There were so many fish out there. And then last night, watching the spawning was just amazing. So I'm going to tell you guys right now that this is my favorite.
Well, that's wonderful. Anna, thank you so much for being here. Can you guys say goodbye to Anna? And did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I just want to say thank you all. Thank you for being interested in this and being engaged. This is your future, and I'm excited, and I'm going to be excited to see where you guys all go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Anna.
Todd.
It's so good to have you here.
Thanks.
All right, guys, that was really cool. We got to talk with Anna. So the next thing that I wanted to do, and as we're going, remember, you can ask questions. Oh, it looks like Miss Tibbetts has a question. Oh, there's 2 types of questions. So I'm going to keep Anna here for a minute. So one from Miss Damon. Is there a type of fish that doesn't spawn at dusk? And do any predators memorize when the Nassau grouper spawn? Good question.
Well, I think there are fish that don't spawn at dusk. I mentioned parrotfishes and some of the small wrasses, blueheads, and I think I've seen yellowtail snapper spawn in the afternoon.
But do you think that that's like the common time, or do you think that it
I don't
varies species to species?
Yeah, I think it varies species to species. Some are daytime spawners and some are nighttime spawners and dusk spawners. And then do predators memorize? I think they do.
Yeah.
I think they know. I think we've seen what we've seen, and I haven't seen the predators on the Nassau grouper aggregation because this is our first time here, but I understand that they show up.
Oh, they
predators
do.
show up, they know. So
yeah.
I think they do.
That is so cool. And then Miss Tibbetts, how many different types of fish are around during the spawn? So as you've been out there, have you noticed many different species?
You know, I only had eyes for the Nassau grouper because this is our first time. I did see tiger groupers out there. We saw black groupers. There was a blackjack swimming through. You know, those were things that I just noticed, but I was really focused. But I think there have been surveyors here.
Oh, yeah.
Who've taken
well, and we can ask
surveys.
Bryce in a minute.
Bryce,
yeah.
Okay. And he can probably answer that question better than I.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, I'm going to have Dr. Simmons come up and give an update on what's been going on so far on the site, because they've been here counting, tagging, video lasering, and all of that for the last 4 days. So I'm going to have Dr. Simmons pop over here. I'm going to make a little bit of room. Is everyone still okay with hearing us? You can hear okay? If not, just write a little text and let me know and we can plug in a mic. All right. So, hi everybody. This is Dr. Bryce Simmons, and he's going to give you a little update about what's been going on here on Little Cayman for the last few days. So maybe tell us like how long ago you got here and what's been going on since then.
Sure. So we got here about 4 days ago, and we have been getting into the water to try and make counts of the number of fish that are there, as well as get information on the size of the fish that are there. That process has been pretty hard this year because the weather has been pretty rough. We've had a rough year, rougher than normal. So that big waves, we had 6-foot waves, and that makes the boat rock a lot, and it makes it very hard to get your gear on and get in the water. And I actually fell on the deck of the boat just 2 days ago. So even
pretty hard,
pretty hard
with all your gear on.
Yeah. So even though I've been doing this for a long time, every once in a while you can make a mistake, and I sure did. But today is the first day we were having beautiful weather. You can probably tell from the background here, you see the palm trees, they're not moving, right? So not a lot of wind today, and that means the sea state is down. Every year we do a series of different methods while we're scuba diving in order to come up with estimates of the number of fish that are there, and also we use different techniques to get at the sizes of fish that are there. We do that because those two pieces of information, how many fish there are and how big they are, tells us something about how the population is changing through time. And we're interested in that to see how management or the different actions that the Cayman Islands government has put in place to rebuild the fishery, to make it bigger, how well those management efforts are working. And this year is different in that we've got 2 different new methods that we're trying out to get at those pieces of information. So I'm going to ask you guys 2 important questions, one at a time, and then we're going to follow up on it. So if you guys are ready, here comes the first one. Why do we have 2 eyes?
All right, who can answer that?
Why not just one? What do we need 2 for?
I mean, I can see okay.
Is it just a spare? Is it
camera 1, camera
like a
2?
Spare tire?
Yeah. So if you have an answer, you can I see Miss Tibbetts has unmuted. Do you guys, would anyone like to make a guess of why we've got 2 eyes? Or anyone over here at Miss Meisel's? Or at my school in Sammamish. Hi. Anyone have an idea over there why we have 2 eyes? In case one goes out? Pirates, you know, only have.
Well, pirates only have.
With the keyboard.
Look, talk to them.
Oh, it's unmuted. Okay. It's so you can have, you know, your field of view, depth perception.
depth. Is that what you were saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That is absolutely right. Very good. Yeah. So I bet a bunch of you have probably gone to see a 3D movie before. And what's cool about a 3D movie is that things come at you, right? You can actually see things moving towards you and back away from you. If you only have one eye, it's just like looking at a flat two-dimensional picture, like a painting, where they can use tricks of painting to make you look like there's depth there, but you really can't perceive the depth. With two eyes, we have stereo vision. And that stereo vision means that we can see 3 dimensions. We can see up and sideways, but we can also see depth. And that depth.
Can you hold on one second?
Sure.
Mr. Stewart's class on the BRAC, if you could just email me your Gmail email account and I can invite you directly. Sorry.
It's okay. So that depth is really important. So one of the new pieces of equipment that we've got out here this year is really cool. It's a stereo video system. So instead of having one camera, we've got 2 that are mounted side by side at an exact distance apart, and they're both shooting simultaneously. And we can mesh those 2 images after we get back from the boat, and we can create our own 3D movie, just like the kind of 3D movie that you go see when you're seeing the Avengers blow up the world, or whatever.
Or like the Star Wars.
Or the Star Wars.
Yeah,
or
right.
Any one of those.
Right.
So we can do that same thing, but instead of Avengers blowing up the world, it's fish underwater. And the cool thing about that is once we get depth, we can then take that video and we can actually measure all the fish. So with that stereo video system, we just run along the aggregation of all the thousands of fish that are out there, and we can take that back to the lab, and we can process that video and make measurements of all the fish.
So why is that? Because before, weren't you measuring them in a different way?
We were.
Because a lot of these guys probably know about the lasers that were used.
Yeah.
So how is this different?
Yeah, so before we were using lasers, and that system works a little differently where we have 1 camera, not 2, and there's 2 perfectly parallel lasers that are 25 centimeters apart. And because they're perfectly parallel, if you get those 2 lasers on a fish, it doesn't matter how far away from us that fish is, the dots that those 2 lasers create are always exactly 25 centimeters apart. And if we get those 2 lasers on a side of a fish, we can use the distance between those 2 lasers to ultimately calculate how long the fish is. And that works really well, but the problem is you have to do 1 fish at a time.
So with what you've got now, you can do all of them in one swoop.
We can do all of the fish that show up in the stereo. And so we can get thousands of lengths with 1 dive, whereas before we were doing really good if we could get 50.
Right.
So it dramatically improves our ability to capture information. And here's why it matters. So you guys are all, I don't know, in school, and you're pretty young. You're not teenagers yet. Well, maybe some of you are, but probably most of you aren't, right? And chances are pretty good. Almost all of you are smaller than your parents, right? You should probably be nodding right now.
Yeah.
So grouper are the same way. They start off small and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe they're teenagers and they're that big, and then they're big old adults and they're that big. So the size of the fish tells us something about how long ago that fish was a baby. And that information can then tell us, if we collect it year over year, how many individuals showed up at a particular year and then grew up to be teenagers in the grouper world about 5 or 6 years later. So that size data tells us something about how many new baby grouper are recruiting to the population, or showing up in the population every year.
So, okay, so that's something that has changed. How has this, so I'm assuming this has freed up all of the people that are out there to maybe do other types of research out there?
That's right. And so one of the other cool new things that we're doing, and here comes question number 2 for you. I want you to do 2 things. First, you're probably all sitting with your friends right now, or maybe you're looking at your teacher. Look at the friend that's to your left, and then look at the friend that's to your right. Now I'm betting, and you can give me the answer on this, I'm betting you can tell that there is a different person here than over here. Just by looking at their face, you know who they are. You can tell them their name. You recognize them.
Right.
Right?
You should be.
You should be able to.
Yeah.
Like I can tell this is Todd just by looking at him. He's got Todd's face. So
Exactly.
Todd's face looks a lot different than my face, and looks a lot different than Anna's face. Grouper are the same. They have faces. They have specific spot patterns on the sides of their face that look distinct from all other individuals. And so if we can get a nice picture of the side of that grouper face and get all of its patterning on its face, and you guys have seen NASA grouper, right? And they got the cool tiger striping and the white spots on their face. Well, those they persist, so they look the same as they grow older, and they're unique. And so one of the things we're doing this year is we're taking cameras down
Can see them.
of all the different groupers' faces. And then we can take it back to the lab and we can use image recognition software in order to say, okay, based on the picture we've taken, I'm now looking at Bob the grouper. And Bob, we know. Maybe we've seen Bob a couple years before and we know something about Bob. He was 5 years old 3 years ago, and Bob likes to eat Creole wrasse and he doesn't really like lobster. So we can tell all kinds of information about Bob just by being able to recognize him year over year.
So that seems like it would be a game changer for you guys, being able to now not only identify the lengths, because that was part of how you were telling, you know, are we having older fish show up and younger fish show up, but how is that going to change the way that you're able to track the fish now that you will actually be able to know, oh, that's Bob and that's Susanna?
So it gives us all kinds of information. So if we have images of the same fish year over year, and we have stereo video, we can see how fast Bob is growing, Bob the grouper, or any of the individuals that we identify out there. We can also, maybe some year in the future, Bob meets an untimely end. Maybe a shark needs a treat and Bob goes the way of a shark treat. And so we don't have a Bob anymore.
Right.
Well, we can see that now in our population because Bob's no longer being photographed at the aggregation. So we can get at mortality or estimate the rate at which adult grouper die.
Right.
And that's a really important thing to be able to do in a fisheries and a management context.
So, hey guys, I'm gonna pause Bryce for 1 second. I have a video clip queued up that I wanna share with you. So hold on 1 second. This is of the spawning aggregation during the day. And then as soon as we are done with that, we'll pop back and you can ask any questions. Actually, before we do that, I have 2 questions, one from Miss Damon and one from Miss Tibbetts. Miss Damon's question is, what is the most scary thing that you have encountered in the sea?
Okay, it was out here, and and it was scary. So, have you ever been in a dark room and it's really, really dark, and like you start thinking about what might be in the closet, and there's probably nothing in the closet, but it's really dark, and it gets scary, right? Because you don't know, there could be something in the closet. One of the things that we have to do out at the aggregation site is we have to take a net and swim through the spawn. When at nights when they spawn, they release gametes, and that gametes causes the water that used to be really clear to get really cloudy. So we can't see through it at all. It's maybe you could see a couple of feet, but you can't see what's beyond at all. And we're out in the middle of the water. It's dark, getting dark, and we can't see anything. And we're having to swim. And we know there are sharks out there. We've seen them. Now, I'm not really worried about sharks, but your mind starts thinking, right? And at the same time, while you're swimming through that spawn, there are more fish spawning. So every once in a while, and you can't see them coming, fish will actually spawn and they'll hit you as they're releasing their eggs. They'll ram into you. Yeah.
And those are big fish.
They're big fish. and it's just, it scares you. It's startling. So that's, I would say, is probably...
Well, and don't you see sharks and other predators out there around the aggregation?
We do, and we do, and we know that the sharks are out there feeding on the grouper because just today, a couple of the large grouper that were out at the aggregation site, they actually had big shark bites out of them. So we know
we've seen that before. You actually we rescued one the last time we were here. If you remember?
That's right. Yeah, that had a big shark bite out of its back. So we know that the sharks are out there and they're feeding on the grouper. So we've never ever had a problem as divers, but it's like the closet. It's where you worry about the thing that you're not sure about what's out there.
The unknown.
The unknown.
Yeah, excellent. So Miss Tibbetts' question: how long can grouper live?
So it depends on the species, but Nassau grouper.
How many species of grouper are there?
Worldwide, there are probably 50 large-bodied grouper. Nassau grouper are the most common large-bodied grouper in the Cayman Islands, and that's the species that we're focusing our studies on. Nassau grouper, they become reproductively active. They start spawning at around 5 years of age, and the oldest grouper that was ever recorded at the aggregation site out here, based on some research that the Cayman Islands Department of Environment scientists did, was approximately 30 years old.
Okay.
So we think
that's pretty long-lived.
They're pretty long-lived for a fish, yeah.
Which they would need to be if they have to be 7 or 8 before they can actually reproduce.
Right, and part of the reason why they live so long is because these fish only reproduce once a year. So they only reproduce either in January or February, right after the full moon, and they don't reproduce otherwise. So if you only have one shot a year at reproducing, you better live a long time so you get many years to try again.
Because I would assume some years maybe not a lot of fish survive, or a lot of the babies make it.
I think a lot of times, almost all the spawn doesn't make it back, and we've seen that here. We go out every year and we look for babies or a new grouper that show up on the reefs here, and most years we don't see any. It doesn't mean that there aren't any, but there are so few we don't see them.
Right.
But one year, not that long ago, we saw them everywhere.
Yeah.
So that when baby fish show up, that's called recruitment, and we call that episodic recruitment. Episodic means only happens every once in a while, and for Nassau grouper, they're episodic recruitment. They only show up in a bunch of babies only show up every once in a while.
Okay, interesting. All right, guys, so I'm going to share this cool video. Hold on one moment. Okay, and I'm going to show you one more video. I have one more cool video, and then you guys can ask some questions about those if you'd like. That's what I just showed. There we go. All right, so can you tell us a little bit about what we just saw in that video?
Sure. So all those fish that you saw, those are all the adult Nassau grouper that are right out at the very edge of this island right now. They're all at that one spot, and they're there to reproduce.
Wow.
And during the day, those are videos that were taken during the day, especially when there's not a lot of current. They're all just milling around and checking each other out. So they're just kind of slowly swimming up and down the reef, all as a big school, as a big group. And you saw the divers that were in that big group. Those divers are the ones that are collecting the stereo video and that are using the cameras to take the fish faces. So we go out 3 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
Twice during the day we go out when it's light out. And during those times, we have all of our divers on efforts to count the number of fish using things like fish face and image analysis, as well as doing stereo video work. And go out and we observe the spawning, and we also collect eggs that are released. And so we have lots of divers that are going in the water, usually somewhere between 12 to 15 divers per dive. So a lot of research is going on out there.
And last night we took some video of some of the eggs that were collected, and I'll post that on the blog later today for you to see. If you have any more questions for Bryce or for Dr. Simmons, now would be a great time. And I have one question here from Miss Damon that is, how big is a grouper fish?
So the Nassau grouper that we were just looking at out there, most of them, if I could do it, those are the teenagers, the smaller ones. That's about, what, 1.5 feet?
Yeah.
And then, or what do you call that, 1/3 of a meter, 40 centimeters, more or less. And then that's right when they start to show up to spawn. And then bigger ones, they'll be, some of the bigger ones that you saw there are 80 centimeters. They're almost 3 feet. So they can get quite large, and they can be.
How much would that weigh?
Maybe 40 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. And some of the biggest ones ever caught are considerably larger than that, maybe 60 to 80 pounds. So they can get very large.
one thing that Anna alluded to is that there used to be more spawning aggregations like this in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any idea of how many or what the size of those past aggregations used to be?
Yeah, so the very first aggregation that was ever described in the literature was estimated to be over 100,000 fish. Now,
100,000?
100,000.
And there's about, what, 7 out here?
We think about 7,000 fish out there. So easily more than 10 times that size. And you saw, what you just saw with those fish right there, that's just a small amount of the fish that are actually out there. So you can imagine 10,000 fish. Each of those fish is roughly 40 pounds, 20 to 40 pounds. That is a huge amount of fish. And you know what's really interesting? Each one of those big fish can produce as many as a couple of million eggs apiece. So with an aggregation as large as 7,000, they're producing billions and billions of eggs. If you have 100,000 fish, it is an amazing amount of eggs.
And so that's also part of why it's so important that you guys are out here protecting the fish while they're spawning. Because if they're caught, that's one of the big challenges affecting the Nassau and their ability to recover.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. So you had asked how many aggregations are left, how many there used to be and how many are left. We don't have a really good understanding of how many there used to be, although certainly throughout most of the Caribbean, there were large populations for the species. And since we know they all reproduced by spawning in aggregations, there must have been hundreds and hundreds.
Hundreds of aggregations.
Of aggregations.
With maybe hundreds of thousands of fish.
Yeah, possibly.
Wow.
So a lot. And now there are relatively few. I would say we could probably guess maybe on the order of 20 large aggregations. And by large, I mean a couple of thousand fish. Most of those are really like 1,000 fish aggregations. The one out here, the 7,000 fish aggregation, we think that's the largest aggregation anywhere in the Caribbean. And it is important. It's important for two reasons. One, because a lot of the research we've done out here looking at where those eggs go after they're released suggests that those eggs come back to the Cayman Islands. So those 7,000.
So they're not going off to Cuba?
They're very rarely. Okay. Very rarely. Now they do. They do a little bit, but most of the time the eggs are coming back home. And when they come back home, it means that those big fish are the ones that are making the baby fish that show up in Cayman. Now, if you don't have them, you're not going to get very many baby fish.
Right.
But every once in a while, that 7,000 fish aggregation releases their eggs, and by the whims of current, by chance, the currents take them to other places in the location in the Caribbean, and those places like Cuba don't have many Nassau grouper left. Well, they need that 7,000 fish aggregation here because when that episodic event, there's that word again, when that chance event happens, these 7,000 fish can help Cuba rebuild its population.
So, okay. On sort of dovetailing on that question, do you guys think that you have an idea of where the tipping point is for an aggregation? Is an aggregation of 1,000 big enough to recover, or will it remain that, or maybe even dwindle?
That's an important question, and one of the main questions we started to try to ask with this project. And at the beginning of this project, we thought that maybe small enough aggregations would cease to aggregate. They would stop. The fish wouldn't aggregate anymore. What we found here in Cayman, though, is that even very small aggregations still get together, even though there might be only a couple of hundred fish. They still show up at the aggregation site and they still reproduce. Okay. So it's important to protect these sites, even if you think you have removed most of the fish. It's still important to protect them because they're still getting together to aggregate and to reproduce.
Okay. It looks like we have a couple of questions. Miss Meisel's classroom is asking, how many eggs are released during a spawning event for a single female? And I think you just touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, a big female will release a couple of million eggs pretty easily. So they have I mean, you see some of the females out there.
They're bulging.
Yeah, what we call their eggs get hydrated. It's right before they're about to release. Those eggs fill out and they kind of blow up, and so they become round and spherical. And those eggs, once hydrated, there's so many of them inside the belly of that female that she just looks like she's swallowed a tire. They get huge, huge stomachs. Wow. And those eggs then will be released only over a couple of nights.
Do you have a sense of what the ratio is of those large fish to maybe the more intermediate size fish?
We can get a really accurate estimate of that with our stereo video, right?
Because so that will give you, how does that help you?
It not only it tells us this year, for instance, there's a ton of the little guys. No, they're not that big. They're about that big. We call these guys the newly minted teenagers, the ones that they just showed up for the first time, and it's their first time to the party. So, and they're enjoying it. Those fish that show up, we can tell, we can estimate how many of those new individuals that are coming to the spawning aggregation by using that stereo video system. We can also estimate things like the total amount of egg production at how many eggs are actually being released by calculating the proportion of the different sizes of fish, and then using that to estimate how many eggs are released.
That's amazing. Miss Mizell, we didn't hear the actual number. It's cutting out. I'm so sorry, you guys. Can you repeat that?
Sure.
It was the eggs released during spawning event for a single female.
So for a single female, a large female will release a couple of million eggs, and those younger, the new teenagers, the ones that are just showing up, maybe 200,000, half a million, 500,000 eggs.
Okay. If any of you want to come up to the mic, you can also ask a question on the mic. You can just have your teacher unmute the microphone, and you can come on up and ask a question. And also, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry to Mr. Stewart, we can't seem to get you on the live feed, but if anyone in your class has a question, you can email me that question, and I can ask it to Dr. Simmons right now. Ms. Damon's question was, how did the grouper know where to spawn if the current blows their eggs far away?
That's a great question.
Those are my students.
Yeah,
I know.
We don't. That's one of the burning questions we still haven't answered yet. We don't know why they choose to spawn where they spawn. We don't have a really good sense of what makes that site special. We do.
Is it special just for the Nassau?
It is not. That's the really interesting thing. Is it's not just Nassau grouper that are out there reproducing. There are species of grouper, like yellowfin grouper and red hind, that are all important. People catch them and eat them, so we care about them. They're also ecologically important, but they're also there almost at the same time, also spawning. And you'll see other fish like horse-eyed jack that are out there spawning. So that site is important for tens of different species that go to that very specific spot in order to reproduce. We have some knowledge about the characteristics or features of those aggregation sites that are common among different locations in the Caribbean. But what we don't know is why they pick those sites.
That spot. For some reason, it's important.
For some reason. And we do know from our work tracking eggs that those sites seem to keep the eggs close to home, but the jury's still out. So it's a really interesting question, and one that we're trying to answer right now. So I love that you guys are thinking about that, because it shows that you got a science brain.
One of the questions that was asked earlier while Anna was on was, do you think that predators remember and are coming back to see or to maybe feed while the grouper are there? And how would you know that?
Yeah, so I do think that we see sharks out there, and I know we've seen the same shark year over year.
Really?
Now, it could be that that's just a local shark, or it could be that the shark is remembering it. But you got to believe that if Nassau grouper have figured out biologically to go to that spot every year and reproduce, surely the things that eat Nassau grouper have also got a similar biological clock, have figured it out as well. We do see in places like Belize, where you have large spawning aggregations of snapper, that whale sharks will show up every year when the snapper are releasing their eggs. And you'll see 3 or 4 whale sharks there.
And they're filter feeders, not like other sharks.
They're filter feeders, and they'll show up in an aggregation. So they've clearly figured out that that is a spot to go to at a certain time of year in order to get a whole bunch of tasty eggs.
One thing that I've noticed on the video, and I'm going to post this later today for you guys to look at on the blog, so don't forget to check out the blog, is that there's a bunch of silverfish that are swarming around in there, and I haven't seen that on any of the years that I've been here before. What do you think? What's going on there?
Yeah, so we've seen, this is the first year that we've seen a whole bunch of egg predators. Those are, I think Anna mentioned them. We saw mackerel scad, which are little silvery fish, and then we saw some young barjack, which are also small silvery fish that school. And we saw them hunting the eggs, and so a big spawn burst would happen. The female would release thousands of eggs, maybe many more than that. And then the sardines would all come in, and they would just be picking away at those eggs. And so it'd be this feeding frenzy that happened on the eggs. But then here come big barjacks, the hunters, the things that eat those small silvery fish,
right.
and they're zooming through that school. And so all the mackerel scads spread out, but then they come back and they're feeding on the eggs again. So it was really, really cool to watch. We've seen some egg predators like that, but this year, for whatever reason, there was more than we've ever seen.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's beautiful to watch.
Okay.
I'm sure the grouper don't like it because, you know, they're eating all the baby grouper.
Okay, Miss Damon's class has another question. We'll probably take maybe 2 more, and then we're going to start to wrap it up for today. Miss Damon's class is asking, what are the grouper's predators?
So there are a number of different predators for grouper. One is other grouper.
Really?
Yeah, so we see out there at the Nassau grouper spawning site, you know, we've seen Goliath grouper a couple of different years. And I don't know if you all know what Goliath grouper are, but they can get to 600-800 pounds.
I'll find a photo and I'll post it on the blog for you.
They can be huge.
Wow.
And so
you've seen one out there?
Yeah. And so you'll get maybe a 60-pound grouper, and that's a big fish, right? But if you got a 300 to 400-pound Goliath grouper out there, it's just a tasty snack for the Goliath grouper. So we'll see other grouper species out there from time to time that'll feed on Nassau grouper. We see sharks. This year we've seen sharks almost every night out there.
One of the students was noticing a barracuda going through and was like, barracuda's mouth seems maybe not so big to attack a fish that big. Do they actually attack a grouper?
It's possible. I think that most of the grouper are too big even for really big barracuda. But the barracuda are there because they like
the other smaller fish.
They like the baby barjacks that are feeding on the eggs. They like the mackerel scad that are feeding on the eggs. So there's plenty for them to eat out there. But I don't think the barracuda are going for the Nassau grouper.
All right. Does anyone else out there have a question for Dr. Semmons? If you do, you can unmute and come up and ask, or you can type it into the group chat. And while we're waiting for that, tomorrow we will have our second live video feed at this exact same time from 11 to 12. And we're going to pull together a bunch of really incredible footage of the nighttime spawning for you guys to see. Because as you know, they spawn at sunset, at dusk, which isn't a time when you're in class and we can do one of these live video feeds with you. So we'll have more scientists here sharing some of the tools and really cool equipment that they use to go out and research and study and protect the Nassau. And then we'll also share some of the footage of the Nassau spawning, which, as you heard Anna Deloach say, is really an incredible, amazing experience, something to see. And then on Thursday, we'll have our third live video feed. And for that live video feed, we will be underwater over at Bloody Bay Wall, which is a famous dive site here on Little Cayman. So I'm hoping that all of you guys are going to be able to join us for that. All right, one last chance for questions. All right, I'm going to unmute you guys, and I want you to say goodbye to us. How about that? All right, we're gonna wave to you. Bye, guys.
Bye,
I hope you guys all had a good time on today's live video feed. Don't forget to join us tomorrow. Hello, you're on the internet. There you go. Bye, guys. There you are. Thanks so much for joining us, you guys. All right, we'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.